So I see folks coming in, and we'll have more come in as I make this quick introduction. So uh, thanks again for attending. If this is your second or third Team Science Skills Series talk put on by the Georgia CTSA. Just as a reminder, we do have some upcoming skills training talks. Next week or next month we'll have Tom O'Neill give you some advice on managing, leveraging, and mitigating conflict. We're doubling down in April with Jessica Wildman and Marissa Scheffler talking about psych safety and multi-team systems. And then we'll end our series with Dorothy Carter from UGA on evaluating the importance of team performance. But for today's session on leading teams, we have Julie Dinh from the City University of New York in Baruch. She has a great publishing record relevant to this talk. She's published in places like Leadership Quarterly, Small Group Research, and Organizational Dynamics, and even has a paper entitled What Makes a Good Team Leader. She investigates teams across different sorts of contexts, which is likely important for those here today, military, medical, space, and civilian teams. And she's a fantastic mentor, as Luke will be helping her with her presentation today. And on that note, I'll stop sharing my screen and let the session on leading teams begin.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Luke. As Chris just mentioned, I am a student who studies under Julie at Baruch College. So I'll be sharing the slides today. The slides are pre-recorded, so there will be like a vocal or sound over the slides. So just follow along. If you have questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to put them into the chat in Zoom. And then Julie will like synthesize those questions. And at the end, when we do the Q&A, we'll go over some of those questions. So we'll go ahead and get started shortly. There are some interactive parts of the presentation, such as breakout groups. So when those are happening, you'll be given a prompt, be asked to think about it for a little bit, and then you'll go into breakout groups and discuss what you think about the prompt. And then following those, we'll come into debriefing sections where we talk as a larger group. So I will go ahead and start sharing my screen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our workshop on leading teams. Thank you to Chris and Lauren for inviting and kindly hosting us even under these unpredictable circumstances. As you likely know, the past week has been chaotic with extreme weather affecting the nation. As a quick note, I'm currently based in Houston, where we are suffering from power and water outages, but otherwise doing fine. I'm grateful that we were able to pivot quickly for today and develop an alternative pre-recorded format. I plan to call in and be available during the entire session, but have narrated today's deck in advance, given that my internet connection has been unstable. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them in the chat so that we can then collect and synthesize them for the Q&A at the very end. We also have a few interactive pieces which Luke will be hosting. These include 2 breakout rooms and debriefs, and we invite you to participate if you're able. We appreciate your patience and attendance and are excited to be here virtually with the Georgia CTSA. I first wanted to review today's agenda. I'll be briefly reintroducing myself and talking about some of my experiences as they inform our content today. We will then answer our key objective questions. What does it mean to lead teams? How can we lead teams effectively, including in today's virtual environment? And then we'll conclude with opportunities for practice and questions. My name is Julie Dinh. I'm an assistant professor of industrial organizational psychology at City University of New York, at Baruch College and the Graduate Center. I'm also the director and principal investigator of the Diversity Interventions and Health, or very conveniently acronymized DIN Lab. I hold degrees, a PhD in psychological sciences with a specialization in industrial organizational psychology from Rice University. And I got my bachelor's in psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. Today, I'm assisted by Luke Kaga, a doctoral student and one of my graduate research assistants at Baruch. My research primarily focuses on diversity interventions like teamwork and training and health, both in terms of well-being and care delivery. Because my content areas, methods, and collaborations are cross-disciplinary, I've published several pieces related to leadership and teams, some of which are highlighted here. What's really important to me in conducting this research is that we look to the evidence in order to inform our practice. Accordingly, I've also consulted for a number of organizations, including federal and research agencies, professional societies, academic medical centers and hospitals, consultant groups, university programs and departments, and nonprofit organizations. A common question across all of these industries is, how can we lead our teams better? So to begin with, I'd really like to pose that question to you. What does leading teams mean to you? I'll open up the floor to anyone who wants to answer this question and share their knowledge, insights, perspective, experiences. Please use the Zoom function of raising your hand, and Luke will be happy to virtually call on you.
Yes, Ashley Singleton.
Hi, I think that leading a team really is about making a space for your teammates and team members to feel comfortable sharing their ideas, or just really creating that environment is really important when you're leading a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think that that is in line with a lot of like the science and research that's come out on leading in teams. It sounds like you're talking about fostering a construct called psychological safety, where everyone in the team is comfortable with engaging in the environment. And so you have these team members, and you got them as part of your team because you believe in their talents and abilities. So you're definitely correct in saying that fostering an environment where, you know, they're comfortable and you can maximize their talent is definitely a key aspect of team leadership. Great, see some things in the chat. I see Michelle Doyle has her hand.
I would say a lot of it involves making sure that my team has the tools and the training and the skills that they need to be able to do the jobs right, and getting out of their way so that they're able to do those well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so providing workers with autonomy. Yeah, and that's definitely something that also is substantiated in the science on the topic. Yeah, letting workers, you know, have full access to, you know, their talents and devices so that they can perform their job within the team. Definitely. See David Oketch raise his hand.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think leading a team basically means inspiring them to meet the missions and vision of their team in the most effective and efficient way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think an important thing that you're bringing up there is like having a clear vision, clear mission, clear goal, so that everyone's on the same page, so that your team has a shared understanding of what the expectations are and the best ways to meet those expectations. Certainly. I see some things in the chat here, so I'll go to them quick. So Kelly Stout says, providing vision and guidance for the work of a team and professional development of its members. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, providing a vision or some sort of overarching mission is definitely important in teams, and we'll see that through some of the science that we go over today. Nicole says, I think it depends on what the team is doing, creating a culture of inclusiveness versus direct communication. Absolutely. While there are some things that I think that are universally applicable to teams, it does differ a lot depending on, the industry or what the specific job and task is. Absolutely true. Fungi, I saw you said you can't raise your hand. So if you have something that you wanted to add, feel free to just speak into the mic.
So I just wanted to say that teams really, for teams to be effective, we need diversity, but also understanding that with diversity comes different points of view and allowing space for diversity that comes from experience and comes from the different disciplines that individuals have perspectives from, and allowing us to communicate in understanding and perhaps forming an understanding of common language if we are working cross-disciplinary.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think teams that value diversity are going to have, a lot more creative potential than teams that don't, because you're bringing in the different perspectives, different backgrounds. And as you said, the cross-disciplinary work can lead to, novel insights that you wouldn't otherwise get in a less diverse team. So absolutely. And then Herb says, I think in order to be effective as a leader, we must display the behavior we expect from our team. Absolutely. Being that role model as a leader and being authentic as a leader, absolutely important for, instilling effective team leadership. Cool. So I think that was a lot of great insights. I'll get back to the presentation. But as I said before, if you have questions or further comments, just feel free to put them in the chat at any time and we'll bring those up during the Q&A.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. By virtue of your being here, I'm discerning that you see leadership as important. There are many reasons why, but I do especially like this quote by Steve Zaccharo and colleagues because it highlights the specific impacts of good leadership. Effective leadership processes represent perhaps the most critical factor in the success of organizational teams. And we'll really focus today on that crossover from leadership into teamwork. If we need further proof that we should care about leadership, however, scientific evidence shows that having effective leadership leads to a number of enhanced outcomes, including team performance, employee creativity, team innovation, work engagement, trust, and organizational commitment. However, it is important to note that traditional models tend not to differentiate between leading subordinates and leading teams. Leading always involves social influence to achieve something, but once again, that can look different depending on the context. When we talk about leadership, leading subordinates, we're often referring to an emergent process or structure in which social influence is enacted on others to achieve some goal. Leadership behaviors are, therefore, typically employed by one or a small number of individuals. Leading a team looks a bit different. This is an emergent process in which social influence is used to direct and sustain efforts to achieve a shared collective goal. Leadership behaviors are therefore more collectively utilized among the team. Leading in teams is unique from general leadership in several other ways. It focuses on the processes rather than the structure. For example, leading teams means that you have to pay attention to the dynamics happening between, within, and across team members, rather than only attending to who's in charge of what. Relatedly, it's not static. You cannot be rigid when it comes to leading teams because you have to adapt based off of organic team interactions. When there are multiple stakeholders and parties, there are also dynamics that you may not have been able to predict or plan for. So fluidity is key. Finally, the leader should be thought of as the completer. You're not the micromanager, but the person who helps the team itself get to the finish line. I'd like to spend some time understanding what leadership behaviors are ineffective. Has anyone heard of a leader with a fiery temper? Unreliable, volatile behavior can be seen as passionate, but it's not necessarily effective. Changing one's mind or expressing arbitrary expectations sets a bad example for the team. We'll talk later about shared mental models. For now, know that these behaviors do not set up healthy boundaries. Bad leaders also disrespect their team members. This sounds straightforward, but it can look subtler than you think. Bad leaders are unwilling to listen and refuse to compromise. Some people admire a headstrong leader, but there's a thin line between being firm and being disrespectful. Keep an ear out for psychological safety, which we'll hear about later in the presentation. Finally, ineffective leaders mismanage their people. This can look an infinite number of ways, but I'll just highlight a few here. Ineffective leaders can mismanage resources. The allocation of time, money, equipment, people power, and other resources is a crucial task. Inappropriately managing these resources can result in negative outcomes for the team. In terms of micromanaging, of course, nobody wants someone breathing down their neck all the time. Managers should avoid having to get deeply involved in the minutiae of a team's performance. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there's laissez-faire leadership. This is completely hands-off and can involve failing to delegate, which is one of the most crucial aspects of a leader's responsibilities. Before we go any further, let's take a moment to reflect. Diagnose your team's leadership style. I'll read a number of statements written from the perspective of a team member. Think about which ones apply best to your team. Our leader always establishes goals up front and makes their expectations clear. Our team lead often changes their mind at the last minute and is very unpredictable. The leader takes my input into consideration when making decisions that affect the team. We don't bother offering our own opinions if they are different from the leader's. We can come to the leader with problems or questions, but they don't micromanage us. We keep the team leader in the loop continuously before, after, and during every task, regardless of task complexity. Our leader is often overwhelmed because they don't delegate and would rather do everything themselves. Our leader always makes sure that everyone is on the same page. If any of these statements in red sound like your team, then there is room for improvement. Unfortunately, that's why we're here today too. Even if we are wonderful leaders, we should always want to improve. The question is then, how can we lead teams effectively? One of the ways to help guide leadership behaviors is through the leader's strategy. Please note that this is something that my colleagues and I developed as a useful reference. It's a catchy way to remember 6 points, but importantly, does bring in the leadership and team sciences for each of them. I'll briefly read the goals of the leader strategy and then go into more depth with each of them. L stands for letting the team work autonomously. E stands for encouraging and motivating team members. A refers to assessing and monitoring the team's performance. D means developing shared expectations and goals. R stands for reducing role ambiguity And S refers to spanning boundaries and creating relationships outside of the team. First, L, let the team work autonomously. What does this mean? It does not mean that everyone works in silos completely independently of each other. Rather, this means that you want team members to function without micromanagement from you or anyone else. Each team member should feel empowered to do their job and do it well. How do you accomplish this? Well, if possible, do the work up front. Optimize team composition. Make sure that each person is in a role that maximizes their ability to contribute. We'll hear more on this later. Once you do that, you can establish norms that reinforce teamwork behaviors. One important idea here is backup behavior. This is essentially when team members support one another. If Jack is unable to finish his task due to a family emergency, Jill can back him up. She'll step in and get the job done, even if the process wasn't what either of them signed up for. This type of behavior across the team allows it to be self-sufficient. Everyone, every stakeholder, including you as the leader, can trust that the job will get done because there is a team culture of support and therefore autonomy. Second, E, encourage and motivate team members. A really critical concept here is fostering psychological safety. Psychological safety is when people on a team feel safe to take interpersonal risks. They can share their thoughts, for example, without fear of negative repercussions like punishment or ostracism. Psychological safety is linked to a number of very important outcomes, including team well-being, engagement, and performance. You can foster psychological safety by admitting your own faults. When you show vulnerability, that tells the team that each member is also free to be transparent about their own and each other's potential weaknesses. You can also ask for input so that you as a leader nurture a sense of collaboration. One other concrete way of fostering psychological safety is by providing developmental debriefing sessions. Make sure that these are low stakes so that they're focused on the professional development of the members rather than the hard deadlines and deliverables of a project. When you have a debriefing session at the end of a performance episode or a project, individuals should feel comfortable fully sharing their perspectives. This can help each member as well as the team as a whole and you as a leader make progress professionally. Speaking of which, this feeds into the next step, A, assessing and monitoring the team's performance. Building off of that last psychological safety recommendation, we can use debriefings to cover lessons learned and steps to improve performance. These debriefs can give team members a dedicated space to reflect on and revise accordingly their procedures and processes. When you do talk about performance, you should make sure to use objective and specific examples. You can point to employees who have hit benchmarks or exhibited particular behaviors that are desirable without singling them out or treating them as though they are favorites. So you can also provide more general examples without, for example, highlighting a specific person, as long as you're still giving them a baseline that is objective and specific. Relatedly, balance positive and constructive feedback. This will ensure that your team members are in a growth mindset, that they understand that they can always improve in a supportive manner. Too much positive feedback and your team members' identities and behaviors may change. They may grow unaccustomed, for example, to constructive criticism in the future. too much constructive feedback, and your team members may become sensitive, demotivated, and pessimistic. You want to strike a balance so that your feedback is motivational. Finally, use team-based rewards rather than individual ones. I like to think of this as celebrating team wins. When one person does well, everyone should be rewarded so that this motivates everyone to do well and decreases within team and individual competition. So providing incentives like time off, parties, what I like to call pizza parties, from elementary school, now in business settings, or even pay increases. Those can all help when it's applied to the team as a way of increasing motivation. You will also want to develop shared expectations and goals. This can involve a few steps. In addition to the debriefs that we talked about earlier, you can also use the pre-brief. This is a meeting prior to the performance episode or project where you outline what the goal is and how you together as a team will accomplish it. When you incorporate feedback and input from the team itself, that makes the pre-brief even more powerful. Altogether, your goal with the pre-brief is to establish a shared mental model. This means that you're trying to establish a common network of knowledge that the team shares and operates based on. Essentially, this is saying that you want the team to be on the same page, have the same existing knowledge, and then make decisions and act based off of that commonality. One powerful way to create a shared mental model is to provide a compelling and uniting mission. When everyone is under one banner, that naturally strengthens a team's bond, motivation to perform, and overall outcomes.
Sorry about that.
Are
Is the audio coming through for everyone?
We hear
No,
you, but don't hear
finally,
the,
you
the,
want
the
to
voiceover anymore.
expand boundaries
There we go.
and create relationships outside of the team. Just like no team member should operate completely by themselves, the best teams are also able to reach outside of themselves and create important relationships. This results in less burnout, more engagement, more creativity, and so on. 2 tips here are to offer novel tasks to team members and seek out developmental opportunities for them. So, in regards to that first point, mix it up. Allow team members to come up with their own ideas and encourage them to follow those when possible and appropriate. You yourself can also seek out developmental opportunities for team members. If there are workshops, trainings, conferences, or other ways for team members to strengthen their skills, grant them that time and energy. You're going to motivate them and also demonstrate your commitment in their professional development. That increases engagement across the board. One thing I want to say before we wrap up talking about the leader's strategy is that these stages are not linear or siloed. It's all synergistic. These behaviors can happen at any time. They don't happen, one by one going down LEADRS. And they can also feed into one another. You may have noticed that certain strategies or behaviors or skills could fit into multiple categories. And that makes sense because leadership really is a holistic process.
I'm going to go back to the reduce role ambiguity part of that real quick, just because I was informed that we missed that part. So just give me a moment to set that up.
Our reduced role ambiguity is related to some of the earlier sentiments. We want to make sure that roles for each person are very clear. At the group level, once you've established a shared mental model and norms of backup behavior across the team, you can then look individually at each team member. Optimize team composition. As we've said earlier, pick the right people for the right jobs. Do this up front and identify and use talent accurately. This will save you a lot of time and energy down the line. There are some options available to you if you are unclear on how exactly you can accomplish this, especially if you are still getting used to a particular team. For example, you can create rotating systems where team members alternate taking on different roles and responsibilities. Think of this as a trial period. In addition to helping reveal individual strengths on a team, this method can also expose team members to different parts of a project and create feelings of community and empathy. You'll want to do this early on in the process to really reap the full benefits. You may also want to use tests and surveys that measure vocational strengths. These include proprietary tests, including StrengthsFinder, research assessments like the Big Five personality test, and widely available online surveys like the High Five. Next, when, as a leader, you do step in, make sure that you're designating roles and responsibilities in a way that creates a sense of ownership within every team member. That is, each person should not look at their job as an obligatory assignment, but as personalized to their competencies. You want to make sure that everyone feels empowered and therefore motivated. Some ways to get at this are to discuss openly and act transparently when it does come to making assignments. Meeting individually with your team members can also emphasize that their work is really because of what they bring to the table. Finally, So let's take a moment now to practice what we learned. Please read the following vignette. I'll give you 2 minutes to review it and then sort everyone into breakout rooms to discuss the prompt. How could you have been a better leader? Once you finish thinking about this, I'll give you 10 minutes in your breakout groups. I'll set up a timer and then we can get back together and discuss how we answered these prompts.
So if you guys just want to take like 2 minutes, go through this prompt. If you want, you can like write down the main points, or you can just take a picture of it if you want to have the prompt for when we go into the breakout groups for 10 minutes. But yeah, so just take 2 minutes. I'll set a timer. And then once that's done, Lauren will put you guys into breakout groups of about 4 or 5 people per group. Okay. Lauren, you can feel free to go ahead and put them into breakout groups. So just once you get the notification that you've been assigned to a certain breakout group, just feel free to enter that breakout group and then discuss with your peers, what you think you could have done better as a leader in this situation.
Hi, Michelle. For some reason, it's not letting me send you into a breakout room. I'm not sure why, or maybe it's just you just not going in there. Maybe we're not. Letting somebody in now. Just FYI.
Hi, Luke and Lauren. Thank you for facilitating this. It still feels so strange, to not be talking during my actual talk. But I think you guys are both doing wonderfully.
Thank you very much.
No one, I always have to listen to my voice playbacks. I always cringe kind of.
I know. I thought halfway through, maybe in the future, I've had people who have pre-recorded their slides and then sat through them and they like it, but I think next, whenever possible, I'll want to do it live just to spare me from listening to myself. Also, yeah, I'm just being hypercritical and being yeah, but I think that's part of just listening to yourself.
I think they sound good.
Sorry, Denise just came in. It looks like she connected to audio. Just want to let you know all of our participants are in breakout rooms right now. So I'm not sure if you want us to send you into there or kind of wait. We have about 8 minutes, 7 to 8 minutes left until everybody comes back.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I'll just wait until they come back.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
I'm gonna grab some water really quick, but I'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Hey, Luke. Okay, I'm about to close the breakout room, so that'll give them about 30 seconds to come back in. Sound good?
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, you should be good to go.
Sounds good. Thank you. Cool. Well, I believe everyone is back. So we'll kind of do this similar to how we did the first discussion. So if you have something you'd like to share that you and your group talked about with regard to this prompt on the engineering team, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you, or if you prefer, you can just type a response in the chat. Really up to you, but I can start taking questions or comments now. Yeah, Dieter Jager. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I think you're muted. Dieter, I think you're muted still.
Right, yes, it's Dieter. It helps me feel better if people mispronounce my name because I mispronounce so many names that, that it seems like fair. First of all, we had a group of 5, but really only 2.5 active members, partly because there are some folks who are on the phone or otherwise in listening mode and can't participate. But I think this was such an easy problem that the 2 of us and the 3.5 or the 3 of us were in unanimous agreement that that wasn't even leadership there. That there was 2 important information channels that weren't being used. One with the customer, to during the design process, talk repeatedly and have meetings with the customer as a whole team. And the other information channel that wasn't working is inside the team. The team didn't talk to each other. So basically there was no communication all the way around, and that is going to be a disaster. So, so it seemed like that was a trivial case of how things could function better. Talk to your customers, talk to your team members, and sort of work collaboratively on solutions. And test your solution, I guess, as well, and don't just make it sink or swim at the end. I guess this one was a sinking solution. But it was such a bad approach that it was easy. Like it was not even even a problem to figure out that this wasn't going to work.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think so. One of the things you highlighted there that we discussed earlier is that like laissez-faire leadership, or basically the lack of leadership, is very problematic. It is pretty pervasive in organizations and businesses, unfortunately. But yeah, if you want to effectively lead a team, it is important to be actively engaged in the team, understand what everyone's thinking, set goals, have a clear vision in mind, make sure everybody's comfortable with sharing. So yeah, I think you've raised some, very clear and concise points there about how this could, perhaps not even be defined as bad leadership. It could just be no leadership. So yeah, great points. Thank you.
Luke, in our group, we also talked about how the project was really a high stakes project, right? It's a floating device for a child who doesn't know how to swim. And so with something that important where really somebody's life could be on the line and safety could be on the line, it's really important to get the input from other people. Why go it alone, especially when there's such high stakes?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point to bring up. And I think there's like a fine line to strike between like being very structured in approach to your leadership and then also like letting people be autonomous. But you're totally right in that in a high stakes situation like this, it's paramount that you ensure that everyone understands, the processes in your team and is having a shared understanding of, what the goal is and what's at stake. So yeah, absolutely a good point. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add before we move on? Cool. All right. Well, I don't see any hands, so I will go ahead and get back to the presentation then. Thank you for sharing.
We have lots of good ideas. So just to illustrate and wrap up this exercise, we're going to look again to the leader's strategy. How can we pull out some recommendations? In terms of letting the team work autonomously, you could not require all members to share every activity they engage in to complete their tasks. Giving freedom to team members allows for more creative ideas and greater satisfaction. You can provide consistent and accurate feedback for effective work. This will motivate and encourage members to work harder and more effectively towards both individual and larger team level goals. You could provide ongoing and consistent feedback to members on the team to ensure progress and improved performance. At the inception of the project, you could have described a strong vision for how the final design should look and ensured all members agreed and understood the plans, including potential setbacks for achieving those goals. You could have clarified each team member's role and purpose to reduce confusion, redundancy, and increase team effectiveness. And you could not only be informed about client interactions, but develop your own relationship with external stakeholders. This allows the team to collect many perspectives on how to maximize satisfaction with the product. So overall, there are many things that could have gone better in the vignette, and the leader strategy allows a simple way for you to look at it from many perspectives and angles and come up with those better and best practices. Now that we've done a hypothetical example, let's do one that's more personal to us. We're going to do a self-assessment. I'm going to read through a checklist that lists behaviors necessary for effective leadership. If you'd like, you can pull out a piece of paper and count how many of these items you check off when you engage in leadership behaviors. I establish trust with followers. I clarify objectives. I check out followers' ability and willingness to achieve specific objectives. I clarify and structure the task. I explain paths for obtaining desired rewards. I clarify timelines for task accomplishment. I apply appropriate degrees of task and relationship behaviors. We make sure small wins in the team are rewarded. We evaluate progress and make changes when necessary. And I define and clarify each team member's role and purpose. So once you have your score, think of this in terms of grades. The closer you are to a 9 or 10, that is 90% or above, the better you're doing. You'd be an A student. That said, these things are much harder to practice than it seems, so don't be tough on yourself if you didn't check off as many items as you hoped you would. You're already here in this workshop, which shows that you're interested and invested in being a good leader of teams. That motivation and desire is the first and most important step in being a good leader of teams. Remember that going forward, you can refer to the leader strategy to check in with how you're doing and where you can find those spaces to improve. So, as we look to the future, what can we do to help improve our skills? Answer the following questions regarding your team. I'm going to put you into breakout groups, this time with a few prompts. Please introduce yourselves, including your name, title, and the type of team you lead, or if you don't lead a team yet, or currently what teams you are a part of or have been a part of. Do team members work autonomously? And if not, should they? Discuss one thing that you can do to motivate someone on your team this week, and if that's something that you can repeat weekly. Self-reflect on your team's performance. Are you meeting your goals? And if not, what can you do to obtain them? And think about your perception of your team's goals. Have you informed your other team members about these perceptions? Are you all on the same page? And if not, how will you get there?
Okay, so just like last time, take a couple minutes to like familiarize yourself with these questions and prompts. And then after like 2 minutes have gone by, we'll put you into breakout groups and you can discuss what you've come up with your group members. Okay, Lauren, if you want to go ahead and put them into breakout groups, that would be great.
Julie, quick question for you. I think I have already asked this, but just want to make sure see if it's okay with you if I share the slides with the participants after the fact.
Yes, I think so. Let me clean them up a little bit. I'll remove like the notes, or I'll make it into like a printable handout.
Yeah, like a PDF is typically really good for these types of things, so then they can't change it or anything like that.
Perfect. Okay, I'll do that. And then I know that we're recording too. Is that going to be shared as well? I forget. I think.
Yes, it will. And if it's all right with you, I think I asked this before, but just in case,
Yes.
put it on our website, just so that we have a team science toolkit, so people can go on and learn things and get different resources. So if it's okay to include this as a resource on there.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'm happy to share. Share this information.
Great. Awesome.
I also just want to be cognizant of the time, because I realize that we're going longer than I had expected. So maybe, did we say 10 minutes in the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I think we could shorten it a couple minutes though if we need to.
Yeah. Let's do that. I think like maybe because we have, let's see, we still have a section on leading virtual teams. So I would think 12:10. So we have 20 minutes to get through. I don't think we have any more interactive things. So maybe we'll just have a few minutes at the end for Q&A, but we don't have too many questions either. Okay. Does that sound good? Oh, sorry. Is it 12:10 where y'all are?
Or
Right.
it's 103.
But yeah.
Oh. Okay. Well, this is why I'm leaving the management to you, Luke and Lauren. Okay. Yeah, so
Nope.
let's give ourselves 20 minutes. So maybe like by 1:15, we should be moving on to the final recordings.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think, let's see, we have. Yeah, okay. So the virtual thing is right after this, like right after this debrief.
Okay.
We got to the virtual stuff.
I'll start pulling people back in at like 108 then, and then everybody will be ready to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Luke, I'm about to close the breakout room, so everybody should be back in about 30 seconds.
Sounds good.
Okay, you should be good to go.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we got everyone back. So what I want to do right now is just copy and paste some questions into the chat that we had about this prompt. So you can feel free to look at what I just put in the chat. If any of the questions seem like something you'd want to answer, you think you have something insightful about, then go ahead, feel free to raise your hand, or just type a response into the chat, or just speak freely if a question is appealing to you.
Luke, hi, this is Ashley. So I work with a team of mostly students. And so at the end of our session, I think Kelly was making a really good point about how we have to strike a balance between when, you allow a space for people to feel independent and have autonomy, and when do you kind of step in and do a little bit more hand-holding, especially, at least for me, especially when a lot of times the position that my team members have, this is their first time working at a part-time job in an academic setting. So they're learning a lot. I feel a lot of times like I'm just as much a teacher as I am a supervisor. So it's striking that balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. And feel free to correct me if you think otherwise, but I'd imagine there's some like individual differences between students with their preferences for how autonomous you allow them to be, or how much they prefer a more structured work setting. So that is another thing that leaders have to balance.
Absolutely.
Cool, great. I see some things in the chat here. So Kelly Stout says, I think that in this age of virtual work, being purposeful about sending emails of appreciation or to tell someone they did a good job on something would be a great practice. Absolutely. Feedback, super important in team settings. It's going to up that motivation factor and have people, more excited in general if they feel like their work is going to be rewarded with good feedback or admiration, then absolutely that's going to be a good leadership practice. Michelle Doyle says 90-second rule, specific direct praise on performance or behavior while looking the person in the eye for 90 seconds. I like that. I think that sounds, authentic because you're like talking to them in person. And you obviously have to like think about what you're going to say beforehand. And again, it sort of plays into that idea of positive feedback and the positive motivational impacts that can have. Great. Anyone else have anything they want to share before we move on? Cool. All right. I will get back to the slides then. Cool. So this is the question that I just put into the chat that we talked about. So if you have a thought about any of these questions as we continue to go on, feel free to just type them into the chat and we can get back to them towards the Q&A at the end.
Finally, I'd like to conclude our session by talking about leading virtual teams. As many of us know firsthand, the pandemic has drastically changed the way that we work, lead, and engage with one another. Many of our teams are now dispersed geographically. With that in mind, I'd like to visit some of the more recent literature on best practices in this regard. In today's world, the use of video conferencing platforms to conduct work has grown exponentially. This comes with a number of considerations, including how do we manage our work-life boundaries? What happens when team members suffer from too much video conferencing and overstimulation, aka Zoom fatigue? And how can we handle technical and internet issues, especially when it comes to meeting performance criteria? If it's not clear already, leading in virtual teams is considerably more difficult than leading in face-to-face settings, in large part because of questions and issues such as these. Indeed, emerging research shows that teamwork is more important than ever in these remote work environments, and that leadership plays a critical role in keeping the team functional. For example, leaders who lack the technical competence to properly use virtual communication platforms will deliver suboptimal work in virtual environments. The research also shows that highly cohesive teams have performed better in these new work environments, and that trust and operational cohesion are critical factors in employing effective team leadership. To this end, critical leadership skills in these new virtual workplaces include virtual communication, creating shared mental models, which we discussed earlier, building trust from a distance, still fostering those relationships, and developing a sense of shared leadership responsibility. To this end, we've identified 4 actionable strategies that are specific to the virtual environment. We're sorting these into the leaders framework, again, to help organize our strategies. First, encourage backup behavior. We've talked about this a little bit previously, but I'll expand on this in the context of virtual environments. Increase engagement, combat Zoom fatigue, and help newcomers adjust. I'll talk again about each of these in turn. Many people now work from home. Although it's convenient, it can also cause difficulties in boundary management. When your office is right next to your living room, there can certainly be confusing overlap between work and personal time. Backup behavior can help here. Having your team support can make sure that tasks get done effectively and prevent work from spilling over into any one particular person's home life. We recently published research interviewing executives, and one Fortune 500 manager shared that they occasionally CC team members on emails related to the projects of others. This creates total information awareness so that people on the team understand what is happening and can step in accordingly to ensure timely and effective project completion. This doesn't mean including someone on every single email, but it does mean forwarding the important things so that if a person is unavailable due to events in their personal lives, the work can still get done. It's also important to increase engagement, especially during a time when people feel isolated from one another. Indeed, working in virtual settings often reduces the investment that team members feel. To this end, team leaders can meet individually with their members. This one-on-one time creates feelings of connectedness and can strengthen the bond that a person feels not only to their leader, but the entire team effort. Team-wide meetings only serve to strengthen these perceptions in a group setting. When designating roles to team members, leaders can also establish assignments that do not lead to overwork. Recall that team composition is incredibly important. If you ineffectively assign a team member, that can overburden them and increase their workload. Be aware of this, especially in virtual work environments where engagement is low and burnout common. Zoom fatigue, as I mentioned previously, is exhaustion created by continual exposure to virtual meetings. I think we've all become highly aware of how draining it can be to be on camera so often. There's a level of emotional labor and performativity that isn't as present in an in-person meeting, simply because we're aware that there's a device recording and broadcasting our facial expressions. To this end, leaders can reduce the reliance on cameras and, therefore, the burden they place on their team members. They can institute camera break periods where individuals leave their camera off. This includes during meetings themselves. You can also substitute meetings with emails when possible. This allows the fuel tank of team members to stay fuller longer. These policies support your team members and give them the bandwidth they need to perform other tasks. Finally, if you are leading a team that has a new member, consider that they may have a more difficult time adjusting in the absence of in-person contact. It's a tough time for everyone, and especially so for people who haven't yet connected and integrated with the team. Here you can continue to draw upon specific strategies to help them create that connection and hopefully reduce future attrition. First, clarify roles and expectations, not just of the newcomer, but around the team culture as a whole. For example, what are the levels of formality within the team? This can be difficult to discern, so being explicit about using titles and communicative norms can relieve stress for your newcomers. Second, set up meetings simply to answer questions and check in with your new team member. Giving them this dedicated space can also reinforce the bond that they're newly developing to your leadership and the team. Finally, consider non-work related virtual events. Even if you don't have newcomers, this can circle back to the increasing engagement point from earlier. During these difficult times, virtual coffee chats and happy hours have become really fun, key ways of keeping people in touch with one another, providing them an outlet for connection. We don't have water cooler talk anymore because there are no physical break room spaces where coworkers can have that casual rapport building conversation. This is a great way to recreate that space. It's of course different, but developing these spaces with more intention is a step in the right direction. So I'm now going to practice what I preach and wrap up my talk here so that we can prevent Zoom fatigue. Allow me to highlight the takeaways before I open up the floor one last time for general Q&A. Here we have our key objective questions, but now this time with bite-sized answers. What does it mean to lead teams? Well, as we've established earlier, leading teams is dynamic and shared, and it can make a critical difference in overall team well-being and performance. How can we lead teams effectively? We can use the leader strategy to help implement effective leadership skills within your team. One final message here is that it is possible to lead teams effectively even in a virtual world. There are plenty of best practices in this talk. However, this wasn't meant to be comprehensive. There are many things that we couldn't fit in, and it certainly isn't mandatory to implement all of them. You don't have to do all of these things in order to be an effective leader. Leading teams, as we mentioned at the beginning of this talk, is not a static or universal entity. I want to empower you to try new strategies, seek to improve your own personal leadership style, and create something that works for you and your specific team. If you would like to read about effective leadership further, I have a few articles listed here that I'd recommend. Please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like more resources. Again, thank you for spending some of your day with me and Luke. Our contact information is listed here. Please feel free to email either of us if you have questions or if there's anything you'd like to touch base about after the talk. You can also find me online on these two websites or on academic Twitter.
Okay, so that concludes our content for today in terms of the session. So we're happy to take questions or hear comments about anything. So yeah, thank you all so much for being here. And thanks, David, for the kind note in the chat. Ashley, thank you. Yeah, the slides will be shared afterwards, so you can look forward to that. Yeah, and thank you guys so much. Happy to take any questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Luke, for facilitating. That was wonderful. I have been taking notes. I know my connection has been a little wonky today, but I'm happy to circle back to some of the things that were asked earlier in the chat. Dieter, I believe you asked earlier, small wins are rewarded. What kind of rewards are we thinking of here? That's a great question. And I do think that some of the other participants may have started answering that question when they mentioned, I think Kelly talked about emails of appreciation. Michelle mentioned the 90-second rule. So rewards can look a lot of different ways depending on what your team looks like or what resources you have available to you. I think the biggest one and the lowest cost one, so to speak, is recognition and praise. And it doesn't need to be, through something that's instant like an email. It can also be through making explicit that their contribution is noted. And if they would like, a rec letter, I know some people work with students, or a recommendation in the future that their achievement and their input will be noted. We'll go towards that. Other ways to reward your team members, again, based on what you have available to you, are opportunities for professional development. If you're working in a lab, maybe access to particular resources or authorship, higher orders. Tangible rewards are always a nice motivator. Again, maybe in less pandemic influenced times, you can have pizza parties, little, I don't know, candy or things kind of just to show people that you have appreciated their contribution. But yeah, time off is another nice one, ending a day early, I think. If other people have ideas too, can certainly throw that in the chat, but you may have to get creative, again, depending on your circumstance. All right. And Herb mentioned, I think there's a disconnect between generations when it comes to leadership. So should my approach to leading my team change, depend on each member? Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the things that I study is culture. People coming from, for example, individualistic cultures, collectivistic cultures, we all have different expectations of our leaders. And so generationally too, someone may expect a more structured leadership style rather than collaborative. So I think the important thing is to make sure everyone is on the same page. You don't want to have members of your team expecting different things out of you. So for example, if you're treating one member, in a super collaborative way, while another person is very authoritarian, that can lead to misunderstanding and breakdowns later on in the process. So this is kind of returning to that earlier point about team leadership having to be dynamic and fluid. I think that you essentially have to try to compromise, find that style that works for that specific team. And of course, it might be iterative. So you might try to begin in a more collaborative approach and then fine tune it. But I think the important thing is to be universal, to have everyone have those same expectations or that shared mental model of what that leadership style is looking like. Any other questions? Oh yes, Whitney asked, could you tell me more about the type of consulting that you provide, if possible? I'm happy to. So the bulk of my consulting now is with academic medical centers. I've been doing a lot of diversity training and consulting. I would say previous projects have really been diagnostic, trying to find pain points in diverse teams when organizations have to serve diverse clientele and customers to try to overcome, you know, those barriers in communication and understanding. Yeah, I will also add that I'm in a transitionary period as I'm moving, or I'm coming to New York and still setting up my lab and consulting work. So some of that may change in the future. Of course, please feel free to reach out to me or connect with me. Wonderful. And thank you again. Thank you all again for bearing with me through this unconventional way of having a talk. I really appreciate Luke and Lauren for helping manage this. And I'm glad we could still all be here today despite all of the chaos happening in the background. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great job. That was nice. I was happy that you were able to
Yeah, I was too.
work it out.
Yeah. There was something zen about recording these slides. Even though there were some points, I don't know if you could tell, when my voice would get more hushed because I didn't want to wake anyone up in my household, or but yeah, it was really fun, and I liked getting creative about it too. So thank you for having me.
It was great. It was great having you on. You got some good questions, and I think that was the most retention from beginning to end that we've had. More like, I know not 80 folks show up. I think we were like at a high of 35, 36 at some point, and then still later on.
Yeah.
So that was really great.
Yeah, it was great.
A lot of times when you say breakout rooms, everybody drops off. And they're like, oh no, I have to talk, and disappear. But yeah, it ended up working out really well. So yeah, this was great.
Yeah, and I think the timing worked out too. So wonderful. Well, thank you again for having us. This was really fun. I hope one day we get to all like meet in person or like have these talks, you know, face to face again. But for now, this was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you guys for setting this up.
Yeah, y'all have a good one.
Yeah,
and,
have a good
stay
weekend.
safe.
Yeah.
And hopefully the power will be back and all that stuff soon.
I hope so. All right. Bye. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.